Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. I'd also like to thank Hazleton Area School District Superintendent, Dr. Frank Antonelli, and Hazleton Chief of Police, Frank DeAndrea, for joining me here today. As you know, the last several months, the United States southern border with Mexico has been flooded by illegal immigrants. Many of them are unaccompanied minors. Throughout my time in Congress, I've been a leading voice in arguing for securing our borders. I've opposed amnesty for illegal immigrants who are already here, and I have fought for a biometric exit system to make sure that we know exactly who has entered the United States on a visa and who has not returned home as they were supposed to. More than 60,000 so-called unaccompanied minors have arrived at our southern border, mostly from Central America, countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. This is a tenfold increase in unaccompanied minors crossing the border since 2011. We have heard a lot of excuses for why they have come here in violation of our immigration laws. We've been told that they are fleeing violence in their home countries, but there has not been any substantial increases in violence there. So it must be something else. What has changed is that the Obama administration implemented its DACA policy, that's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, in 2012. This policy tells people that so long as they make it to this country safely, they won't be asked to leave. The president has put out the welcome mat for residents of other countries, and he has told them that our immigration laws will not be enforced. I went down to the border near McAllen, Texas, and saw the situation with my own eyes. Some of them present heartbreaking situations. But when I talked to the Border Patrol agents, they told me a different story. Many of the unaccompanied minors are in fact arriving with members of their families, or they are seeking to meet up with members of their families who are already here illegally. In addition, over 3/4 of them are males between the ages of 14 and 17, and some of them are affiliated with violent criminal gangs or are being recruited for gang membership right here at the border. And some of them are carrying communicable diseases. And the administration has begun to transport thousands of these illegal immigrants to communities all across the country. That's where the problem in our own backyard began. Just a couple of months ago, I learned from Hazleton city officials that they had been contacted by a nonprofit group, the United States Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. The group has asked about housing some of the minors at a location right across the street from where we stand today. That's how I found out, because the organization had called the city. The federal government didn't tell anyone about the plan, not the governor, not the Department of Welfare, not Luzerne County. When I made the information public, residents of Hazleton rightly expressed their concerns, and the plan was dropped. But we learned an important lesson in that episode. The federal government is working with organizations across the country to place unaccompanied minors in various communities without telling anyone in the state or locality that they are doing so. As of July 31st, we know that at least 456 unaccompanied minor illegal immigrants have been released to sponsors in Pennsylvania. The shelters and facilities, according to the best information available right now, are in Mechanicsburg, Wilmersdorf, Bethlehem, Montgomery County, and in Philadelphia. There could be others, and there could be plans right now being made to house more, all without telling state or local governments. This has to stop. So today I'm announcing a piece of legislation that I will introduce next week that will give state and local governments a heads up when such plans are in the works. It is called the Unaccompanied Alien Children Transparency Act. It is very straightforward, and it truly will empower states, governors of states, and local governments by giving them all of the information they need to make an informed decision about relocation plans. And it gives them an opportunity to either approve or reject those plans. First, it will require the Secretary of Health and Human Services to provide detailed information. The Secretary will have to inform state and local officials of the locations and durations of any housing contracts awarded, and also provide an assessment of the costs associated and potential impact on education, health, and public safety. The Secretary must also certify to the state and local officials that the unaccompanied minors have undergone health screenings, including vaccinations, and pose no public health threat. Additionally, the Secretary must certify that the unaccompanied minors and the individuals who will take custody of them have undergone background checks and pose no public safety threat. Not only should states and localities know about these relocation plans, they ought to know what the impact of unaccompanied minors will have on that community. Who exactly are they, and what kind of background screenings have been done? If they will be educated locally in public schools, how much is that going to cost? These are important questions that any community would ask. The legislation will also require the Department of Health and Human Services, also known as HHS, to provide a 30-day notice and comment period. This will allow states and localities to review any proposed contract and accompanying certifications of health and public safety background checks. At the conclusion of the 30-day comment period, HHS will have to hold a public hearing within 10 days and provide a representative to address community concerns and questions. At the end of the initial comment period, the governor of the state in question must decide whether to affirm the contract within 7 days. If the governor does not affirm the contract, it is effectively vetoed. If the governor does affirm the contract, then the county commissioners for that jurisdiction will have 7 additional days in which to object to the contract. If a majority of the county commissioners do not affirm the contract, then again, it is effectively vetoed. The people in my hometown of Hazleton found out about the plans for unaccompanied minors here, and they made their voices heard. It's only fair that Americans everywhere have the same opportunity through their elected officials at the local and state level. This bill is especially important right now because we have seen the federal government act in secrecy. The administration has denied right-to-know requests from various organizations and refuses to disclose exactly where the children are being transported. This is from a president who has promised to be transparent. Unfortunately, this legislation is necessary to make sure that our states and localities know exactly what the federal government is doing right in their own backyards. Now, I'm a father and a grandfather, and I've seen the conditions of some of the people who have come to the southern border. I have compassion for their situations, but I also believe that the responsibility of them should rest largely on the countries that they came from. This should not be America's problem alone, and it certainly shouldn't be the problem of states and localities who are right now being kept in the dark about the movement of illegal immigrants. I will introduce this bill next week, and I look forward to a full discussion on its merits as it begins the legislative process. I'd like to now ask Dr. Antonelli and Chief DeAndrea to say a few words about how bringing illegal immigrants into a locality would impact local residents.
Thank you, Congressman Barletta. Currently, we have 4 undocumented minor adolescents, border crossing children enrolled in the Hazleton area school district. And I say adolescents because the age range of these 4 students are between 14 and 17 years of age. The problem we have in the Hazleton area school district is with the McKinney-Vento Act, which allows for unaccompanied children, not in the physical custody of parents, who are sharing the housing of others because of loss of housing or economic hardships or other causes, to be declared as homeless. And as such, with a homeless designation, they can now avoid all student enrollment documentation requirements, including immunizations and, of course, proof of residency. And this creates a problem for us as far as the cost for educating these children. We know that at least 2 of the 4 have had no prior schooling at all. And again, with an age range between 14 and 17, it's problematic for us as far as where we place them and how we begin to educate them and what that's going to cost us. The other issue, of course, is with the health concerns for our student population. Again, they are not required to have immunizations, and they are entering our system in our schools and in our classrooms without proper immunizations and health care protections for the rest of the student body. And I may add that under McKinney-Vento, these undocumented minors are also eligible for 15 other federal programs and services by law. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Barletta. Thank you, Dr. Antonelli. Recently, I've become more and more discouraged by the federal government and the lack of assistance and even the lack of understanding of the problems that face municipalities. Just 2 weeks ago, the congressman hosted a federal government meeting between local law enforcement officials and immigration, customs enforcement, so that we could explain our plight and request help. And their answers to us about the same issues that Dr. Antonelli just brought up as fact and as law were explained that our district can put restrictions on that. And it saddens me that I hear spokespeople from the federal government themselves not even knowing what's going on within the municipalities based on the laws that they make. As critical infrastructure erodes in the cities and towns and educational problems exist nationwide, this year alone, the U.S. government, according to the Health and Human Services website, is going to spend $846 billion, almost $1 trillion, on relocating refugees into the nation. The problem that I have with that is that's almost 1/5 of the entire budget for the entire United States. And I'm hoping that those figures are wrong. But if they are wrong, what else is wrong with the Health and Human Services plan and or their feeling for municipalities? The entire United States national defense budget is only $581 billion. If you go to the Health and Human Services website, it explains it was costing the federal government too much money to house these refugee children in the 3 military base installations that they had. And because of it, they've opted for a plan to move these refugee children into the mainstream population and put them thousands of miles from our border. Health and Human Services is quick to say that these children pose little or no threat to the community and will be maintained in the facility until they are placed in foster care. Forgive me, but less than 1 year of being able to assess a program is hardly what I would consider, in my eyes, enough time for you to give me a credible, educated opinion on if these refugee children will pose a threat or not. September 11th, 2001, I was a Pennsylvania state trooper, and I was assigned the security detail in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, for the crash of Flight 93. I will never forget that day. That specific day, the nation stopped all air travel. We stopped ingress and egress to cities. We tightened our borders. Mohammed Atta lived in the United States for over a year. He lived here from June of 2000 till September 11th of 2001. And he also was referred to as a good, quiet neighbor, which scares me about the Health and Human Services website referring to refugee children as good, quiet neighbors. It saddens me that not 13 years later, we have opened our borders, opened our arms, our communities, and our pocketbooks to what could possibly be the largest real terroristic threat that the United States has ever faced. As the real threat of ISIS is still being learned, we've not only decided to allow potential criminals and terrorist organizations to infiltrate our country, we've decided to welcome them through refugee children that we cannot even identify. Then we move them thousands of miles into the heart of the nation, and we pay for them to integrate. The HHS website calls the community shelters minimally impacting on local communities and considers them good, quiet neighbors. These shelters in communities have not even existed for 6 months, and somehow they feel they can make an educated decision on what is best for our community. Perhaps they don't pose a threat to Washington, D.C., because these refugee centers are not in Washington, D.C., but they are a very real threat to local communities. They're a threat by creating a burden on an already overburdened system of local government. This burden can cripple and even kill what we in small-town America know as quality of life. Something that the federal government seems to have forgotten. I am proud of Congressman Barletta and the legislation he seeks to introduce next week to the United States Congress. It is refreshing to see that at least someone in Washington, D.C. understands the issues that face all levels of the nation, and not just the federal level. Someone in Washington, D.C. knows what quality of life really is. Solving a federal problem by making it a local one is not solving it at all. It's actually making it worse. Speaking as the chief of police whose community is still suffering from a refugee center of sort being placed in my downtown and the havoc that it creates, I can tell you that the effects are long-lasting, and these centers make for far from good neighbors. They cause what is already a depleted infrastructure to crumble from the additional burden that is placed on police, fire, schools, and medical services. I realize perhaps these refugee centers may work in cities of the first class or rural America where they will not affect or cripple. But I commend the congressman for coming up with a plan that will place the final deciding factor on and in the hands of the communities that these centers would burden if placed here. This is not an immigration issue. It's not an issue of color or race, and it is certainly not an issue of the love of children. The issue at hand and this legislation is 100% about the safety and protection of the people of the United States of America. Thank you, Congressman Barletta, for being willing to fight for what is right for the people of this country and for trying to protect not only the people, but the land that we call home and the American way of life.